5 and 6. Shared Read 5 is called Beautiful Sand Dunes. And before I even get started, I'm going to think about some questions I have because asking questions helps me to sharpen my focus and to look for those answers so I'm more engaged in my text. So I'm thinking already that sand dunes that I know and have seen at the beach or that we saw in our science textbook don't look like these sand dunes that I'm seeing in the picture on page 28. So I'm kind of wondering, where are these sand dunes? Because my guess is they aren't beach sand dunes. So that's kind of where I am going with that thought. And then the other one is, this is called Beautiful Sand Dunes. And thinking that they're beautiful would be an opinion. So I'm kind of wondering, is this going to be an opinion piece or is this going to be teaching us about sand dunes? So let's listen. I want you to think of some questions that you have. See if your questions are answered as we listen to this text as well.
Shared Reads 5 and 6. Remember to annotate as you read.
Beautiful sand dunes. What do beaches, deserts, and Mars have in common? All three are places where sand dunes usually form. Sand dunes are created by wind blowing loose grains of sand into mounds. I think they are some of nature's greatest artworks. Some sand dunes are waves or ripples. Others form star shapes. Dunes that form where the surface is hard may be small in size. However, dunes can be as large as the state of Texas if they form in a place where the sand is looser. Another amazing fact about dunes is that they can migrate or move several feet each year. No matter what size or shape, I say sand dunes are works of art. Fishing.
Okay, so sand dunes. These, I'm guessing because of their color, are either desert or Mars sand dunes, right? Because they've got kind of that reddish hue. Looks like it's light here, so my guess is this is probably in a desert somewhere. And they are pretty, right? They look nice, and they are ever changing because that sand gets picked up with the wind. If it's in a place like the desert, there's not a lot of rain there, so it's not going to be moved as much by water, but definitely by wind. So a couple things I wanted to look at. One is that tomorrow we're going to be learning about proper nouns versus common nouns. So if we look at this first sentence here, in our text, it says, what do beaches, deserts, and Mars have in common? Do you see that? What do you notice about those three words? What I noticed is that beaches and deserts have lowercase letters, but Mars has a capital M. They're all nouns, they're all places, but only one of them is capitalized. And that's because Mars is a proper noun. It's the name of the planet. Whereas beaches and deserts are just general terms. Now, if I said Clearwater Beach, then it would be capitalized, right? Or the Sahara Desert, that would be capitalized. But because it's just general, those are common nouns, so they don't need to be capitalized. But what do they have in common? They are where sand dunes usually form. And how do sand dunes get formed? They're created by wind blowing loose grains of sand into mounds. Okay, here's another opinion. The author says, I think they are some of nature's greatest artworks. And then it talks about the shapes. It can be wavy, it can have ripples or star shapes. And then it also says that they can be as large as the state of Texas. Now, again, we see a capital letter here, and that's because Texas is a proper noun. It's the name of the state, so it needs to be capitalized. Now that we've talked about that, though, I want you to stop and think. Texas is a huge state. And they're saying that a dune could be the size of Texas. Isn't that crazy? And then it also says that they can move several feet each year. Now, we've been learning about measurement in our math unit. And feet is the plural for foot. So we've learned that 1 ruler or 12 inches equals 1 foot. This is more than one of those, and it's an irregular plural. So instead of saying foots, it changes to feet. And in this case, it says that they can move several feet, so several 12-inch rulers, right? That's how we can picture that in our mind each year. Several usually means quite a few. Okay, so let's continue and look at fishing in the desert.
In the desert. On my 8th birthday, my grandpa came to my house. He said he was taking me fishing. We got into his truck, and an hour later, we were in a desert.
Okay, so I'm going to stop here and think again about asking questions. Fishing in the desert is a really strange title to me because normally we fish in water, right? That's where fish live, and I know that fish have to live in water to stay alive. So to me, that doesn't really make sense because the desert doesn't have a lot of water. It's pretty dry. So my first question is, why would someone go fishing in the desert? Let's keep listening and see if that question gets answered.
Gramps, how are we going to fish here? I asked. He just smiled and introduced me to our guide, Anna. Anna said that millions of years ago, the desert was covered by a lake. The lake was filled with different kinds of marine life. Crocodiles even roamed the shore. Anna showed us how to use the tools she brought to dig. By the end of the day, we found 8 fish fossils. On the way home, I thanked Gramps for taking me on the best fishing trip ever.
Okay, so they weren't truly fishing in the desert, which makes a lot more sense. I was kind of confused by that title. They were looking for fish, but they were looking for fish fossils. They weren't looking for live fish, right? Again, I wanted to talk about a couple of things. We were looking at, in the last text, we were looking at proper nouns, and we've got a couple of proper nouns in this text as well. One of those is Gramps. That's the name of his grandpa. That's what he calls him. And then the guide, Anna, as well. Now, I want you to notice up here in the first sentence, it says, my grandpa came to my house. And grandpa is not capitalized. And that's because it's kind of a general term like store, right? Store doesn't need to be capitalized. That's a common noun. But if you say, I'm going to Target, then Target would be capitalized. Same thing here. Grandpa, common noun, because she's just saying my grandpa. But she calls him Gramps, and so that is his name for her. And so that needs to be capitalized there. So how did they fish in the desert? That was kind of the question that Anna that the little girl had as well. How are we going to fish here? And the way they fished was they dug into the sand of the desert to find the fish fossils. That's what they were looking for there. Now, the reason they were able to do that is because millions of years ago, the lake or the desert was covered by a lake. Okay. Now, when the land changed, there was no longer a lake there. Probably dried up, the fish were no longer able to live, and so now there's fossils of them in the desert. So that's why they were able to fish in the desert. You're going to answer a few questions about sand dunes and fishing in the desert in schoolwork to show me what you learned about these two texts.